Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I'm Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. In our ongoing series about artificial intelligence, today we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Kazim Rizvi. Mr. Rizvi is a public policy entrepreneur and founder of an emerging policy think tank, The Dialogue, a leading voice in India's technology policy. He's also the founding partner of DeepStrat, a New Delhi-based strategic consultancy and think tank. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talk, sir.
Thank you so much, Sheena, and pleasure to be here. Look forward to the discussion.
So, to begin with the potential harms and impacts of AI that it can have on our lives, can you elaborate a little on the harms and impacts of AI that may arise across the life cycle, especially concerning their implications on the society at large?
Yeah. So, when we look at harms and impacts across an AI life cycle, what do we mean by harms and impacts, right? So, impacts is something with respect to some sort of a gap or maybe at the development stage of AI. This is something which causes some sort of tension with societal issues at the development stage, and harms are a consequence to the impact, which usually occur at the user deployment stage of AI, right? So, for example, when you look at bias, right? So, bias at the development stage of AI, that is a sort of an impact. And then harm will arise with respect to the machines and the models perpetuating those biases, and then those biases, being reinforced in the society. So the societal impact is basically the eventual harm which is caused due to certain gaps at the development level of AI, right? Then again, we look at explainability. Now, explainability is the ability of a model to be able to explain how it arrived at an outcome or an answer or an output. Now, if an AI model is not able to explain with respect to how it arrives at a particular output, that is an impact. And the consequential harm arising out of that is lack of transparency, lack of accountability with respect to how the models are working, and then inability in terms of able to understand for the larger section of society in terms of how these AI models are providing the output the way they are, right? So that's another example when you look at impacts and harms. And basically here, the idea is to look at existing issues. So you have impacts with respect to legal negligence. You have historical biases embedded in the AI systems. You have impacts regarding data veracity, or even diversity. So when we look at diversity with respect to the development of AI, if those the engineers, the coders, the team which develops the models, if there is not sufficient diversity with respect to their socioeconomic status in society, that could result in a model which perpetuates existing biases, which is skewed towards sections of society which have a higher stature, or section of society which is usually discriminated against is not reflected in the models and in the way the models are designed. Then the same bias and the same challenge is seen when the models perform and when the users use these models. So from impact to harm, that's the life cycle we've looked at, and this is across developer, deployer and user stages. And the consequential harm is basically once a population is using these models, what are the challenges they are facing, right? So that's basically what we've what we sort of looked at both these life cycles.
AI, the use and the development, the deployment involves many stakeholders. In your perspective, how should different stakeholders approach AI at different stages? And what specific responsibilities do they bear in mitigating potential harms that are associated with the AI technology?
So I think when you look at the different stakeholders approach of AI, you have, first of all, the developers. So the industry which develops the foundation models, right? The core AI models that are developed by the industry. So that's one key stakeholder. The other is the government, the policymakers, the parliament, which is responsible for regulation, which is responsible for setting ethical standards, which is responsible for setting guidelines, guardrails around which these models should be developed and deployed, right? Then the third is the end users, the impact population, people at large. And here you have customers, you have B2C, and you also have B2B, which is businesses that are using AI applications to carry out their tasks, to enhance their productivity, to improve their efficiency in their day-to-day professional lives. So all these stakeholders are responsible with respect to, looking at responsible AI, looking at ethical standards, etc. So let's start with the developers, the core industry, which is designing the foundation models, which is, training these foundation models with, billions and billions of data sets and billions of tokens as well, right? And then what happens over here is there are certain principles, when we are looking at the development stage. So one is, of course, bias, right? So bias, in fact, starts at the very beginning where the data which you're using to train the models, it has to be free of bias as much as possible, right? That's important. The second is around human in the loop. So once these models are being trained to carry out certain tasks, be it coding, be it answering a question, be it writing an article, be it editing something, be it researching even basic logical tasks, etc. These models are being trained to perform these tasks, right? So at what level do we have human in the loop when it comes to the training of the models? How much human intervention is involved within that training process, so that when the eventual results is there, when the AI gives an output, the output is has minimal biases to it. So human in the loop is very important, and it's also important to look at different contexts. So you have to apply local context, local sensitivities when the models are giving an output, and it's only possible when you have humans in the loops, right? So that's second. I think third is around explainability, and explainability of models is something which people are talking about, and the onus is, of course, on the developers to be able to make sure that the models are able to explain some of the outputs and the reasons and the logic behind how these outputs are giving these answers, or whatever the task they're doing. So that's important. I think transparency is another critical aspect which the developers have to look after. And I think when we talk about transparency, we look at in open source models that there is greater sense of transparency. But I think it's a debatable question whether we really have open source models or not. I think that's a conversation we can have separately. So this is the developer level. Then we look at the policymakers. And I think the role of policymakers is very critical here. You may have seen that the EU has passed the AI Act. They have categorized low risk, high risk, medium risk models. But that's a separate question. I think what is important here is to look at some sort of standardization. So we have already seen that the first standard for AI has now, for responsible AI, has now been published. So that's a start. But we also need policymakers at the local levels, at the national level, at country levels, to be able to come up with some sort of principles, guardrails in terms of how these models will be trained and developed and also used eventually, right? So how should developers use, train these models? What are the necessary standards, necessary guidelines they need to follow with respect to transparency, accountability, etc.? What is it that people who are using these models, for example, doctors and healthcare clinics using these models, how careful should they be? What other standards they should apply, right? testing, etc., is necessary. So how much testing we need to do, auditing of models is necessary. So all these principles which we tend to sort of apply and sort of ask the developers, deployers to use, someone has to make sure that it's being done. And I believe that therefore you need some sort of a soft regulation. You need some sort of a guidelines or a framework, which we don't have right now in India, to be able to tell the industry that, look, these are the 10 things or 15 things you have to do. It's necessary to do X, Y, Z to minimize impact, to minimize harm, and also for the end users, for the end businesses, for the impact population. It's necessary in terms of how should they go about using these AI models, right? What are the risks associated with those models? So I think there is definitely a need for certain guardrails over here, and the stakeholders with respect to policymakers have a responsibility over here. Now, coming to the last stakeholder, which is the population, impact population or end users, I think over here, they also have responsibilities with respect to being able to understand what are the risks associated with using these models, how much can they use these models to drive efficiency in their daily lives, professional lives, etc. And also regularly looking at how updated the models are, how transparent these models are, understanding the risks. So, for example, let's say there's a marketing company or a social media company, which does social media marketing. Now, for them, a large language model is very helpful with respect to creating content farms, basically, like large pool of content which is continuously published on social media, but they have to verify whether it's true or not, because we know that large language models are prone to hallucinations, are prone to giving wrong information, are prone to inaccuracy. So they have a role to play, right? So I think it's necessary for us to look at these aspects. And I think going forward, it's important that we have more conversations around these issues.
As AI become parts of our daily lives, there's more emphasis on responsible AI, ethical AI, right? Trustworthy AI. I think some of the principles of what a responsible AI would look like, you have highlighted, like there should be the explainability factor, data should be unbiased, there should be diversity, right? There should be transparency. Overall, how would you define responsible AI, and what measures can be put in place to ensure the responsible development and deployment of AI?
I think when we look at responsible AI, trustworthy AI, ethical AI, these are all terms which basically mean the same thing, that the AI should be safe. It should be, something which is not causing harm or causes minimal harm, and it should be trusted to use, right? So these three aspects are critical, minimizing harm, removal of harm, safety, and trustworthiness. And this is also aligned with, what the Indian government has been talking about, safe and trusted internet at large. Now, how do we get to a stage where we can use safe and trusted applications? And I think we have a long way to go here. But there are, I think, in my mind, 7 to 8 principles which are critical and which can be bucketed under either responsible or ethical AI. These are all same terms, substitutable terms for basically saying the same thing. I think the first thing when we look at AI is around bias, and I spoke about bias previously, but we cannot sort of really overstate how important bias really is. So bias and minimizing bias is essential. I think the second aspect is around, and we've been looking at this, is copyright. And there are 2 points over here when it comes to responsible AI. One is around protecting the copyright, of course. When you look at, let's say, the large language models, for example, scraping through data and collecting billions of data sets, of which a lot of that is copyrighted material. Now, how do we ensure that what they produce, if they are generating content, they're giving due credit to the authors, right? But also it's important to make sure that you have access to journals, you have access to material out there, because it's necessary to ensure that as we see the growth of large language models, the availability of copyrighted works is going to be critical. So in my opinion, we should have exemptions for large language models when it comes to copyright. And I believe that it should be looked at fair use for large language models, especially as we are looking at the growth of this industry and we are looking at the growth of local large language models and, looking at something which, in India, we are looking at multiple startups creating their own LLMs. Now, the problem here is if you start licensing copyrighted material, of course, the large language model should not produce something verbatim. Okay, that's not done at all. They should definitely use the content which they have been trained on to produce or to generate a content which is different, but they should be exempted from copyright infringement in overall, because as you see the growth of smaller LLMs, it's going to be very, very important for us to make sure that we are able to allow smaller LLMs to be able to access these copyrighted materials. So I think there should be an exemption for copyright. Then we look at data protection, right? So obviously, protecting data, protecting privacy of users is critical. So that's another principle for responsible AI, ethical AI. But at the same time, we should also make sure that we democratize the access of data, right? So both things go hand in hand, right? Then comes the aspect around misinformation, content moderation at large, I think is very important. And for this, it's important to have human in the loop at the level of training, especially for large language models that are pre-trained with billions of data sets and have more than 1 trillion parameters. It's critical because what happens is you have these generative AI applications giving out different type of answers, and inadvertently there are biases. When the content is being produced, or if the LLM is giving out some sort of an answer, so to speak, it should at the training level have some human intervention to ensure that the answer is as accurate as possible, and in the context of local sensitivities and appreciates local sensitivities. So that these two things are very, very critical for a large language models to have. So content moderation, and again, this goes for misinformation as well. It should not give out inaccurate information. It should not give out incorrect information or wrong information. So how do you minimize hallucinations of LLMs is also an important principle when you talk about responsible AI, because accuracy is critical from a safety point of view. And we've seen in the past that people have been using, LLMs, and there are lawyers who have gone and pleaded in the court, and they've been caught out because they've used LLMs, and some of those LLMs gave out incorrect information regarding the case or the research they were doing. So these are some of the important principles. Then of course we have competition aspects as well. Just I think when you look at competition, one of the things is power to compute. Okay, now you need a huge amount of computing power when it comes to training of large language models, and even the ability for them to give out, or to perform their task for millions of people out there. Now, not everybody can afford that level of computing power, especially the smaller startups. So how do we democratize this, right? Then there's another debate going on, open source versus closed source model. And there is a general feeling that open source allows for greater freedom, greater access, etc. But open source also makes it less expensive. So using huge investments to train LLMs. So not everyone can do that. So investment money is critical over here. Now, with open source, it's also critical to ensure that, while you are giving the ability for people to use these models, the risk associated is everybody can create, then it's easier to create a deep fake. Okay. So that's there. And then going on to deep fake, looking at the harms over here, also looking at, the possible end user principles. So not using AI for something which is harmful or causes problems in society, etc. And I think just looking at deepfake again, labeling, etc., could also be done to make sure that the AI gives out, or people know that okay, this is a synthetic digital media, etc., whatever that may be. So these are some of the principles that are critical. And I think as we are growing and as we are progressing in this debate of responsible AI or trustworthy AI, we have to make sure that diversity is there, so the people who are training, people who are building these models, they need to come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. We need more women involvement at the development level, so that the training is done in a way that it reflects both genders equally, right? That's also very, very critical. And I think accuracy I spoke about earlier, competition, content moderation. So these are some of the principles which I think there are conversations happening in the public discourse, but I think we need to have more conversations at a level where we can start figuring out some sort of a framework for responsible AI in India.
You talked about end user principles, and I want to elaborate. I want you to elaborate a little more on that, because in recent times there were cases of there was misuse of freely available AI tools on social media platforms. How do you perceive these challenges, and what guardrails should be in place to counteract such misuse?
So, AI is a dual purpose technology. So as much as there are uses, there will be misuses, which is natural to any dual purpose technology or significant technology in our times. So I am not surprised that people are going to be using it for wrong purposes. But I think what we need now, if we look at, let's suppose, deep fakes again, right? I think what we need is some sort of a guardrail, or even within the industry we are seeing there are conversations that people are talking about, okay, can we do labeling of something which is synthetic digital media, which people can know that, okay, this is something which is not real. So maybe they will not share it as actively on social media as they would have if they were not aware of it, right? That's one. So identification is important of synthetic digital media, of something which is created through AI, which is not accurate or which is not giving an accurate picture, right? So misuse will always be there. People will always use it to spread misinformation, disinformation campaigns, etc. Which is why I think the onus lies with the government, the industry, the AI developers as well, to come to a conclusion where they say, okay, we have some solutions to implement, because I think that you need a technical answer to solve for some of these problems. We already have sufficient regulation within India's IT Act to deal with, let's say, deep fake led problems, right? Under Rule 31B, you have additional due diligence norms, out of which you can talk. There is misinformation within which you can cover this issue, which already talks about the fact that the platform should, with reasonable efforts, try making sure that the users are not posting XYZ content which is causing misinformation, etc. So the onus is already on the platform through regulation. I think what we need are technical solutions in order to be able to identify, to detect, etc., and then eventually raise awareness in the among the people in general, to tell them that, look, this is deep fake, this is not original, so don't share, etc. So I think there are options available, and I think we need to look at those options as we proceed.
Lastly, to talk of the onus on policymakers, do you think EU's AI Act should be seen as a guiding light for India to formulate policies and regulations to ensure responsible AI development and deployment? And if not EU's, then what approach should India take while attempting to regulate AI?
We are at a stage where we are seeing large uses of pre-trained models by end consumers. And this is a significant moment in our history, because until now, it's not that AI has not been around. AI is around for many years, and we've been interacting with it, though not actively or knowingly. But when you look at generative AI has been around for a while. You look at your Siri, you look at your Google Translate, even those where you type something and then it predicts the next word and it finishes the sentence for you if you're writing an email. Uh, in social media, companies use it to moderate content, take down content. So AI has been around for a while, and we've been using it, and we've also been using generative AI for a while. So nothing has changed. But why are the last couple of years so significant, and why is there so much talk around regulation? Is because with the advent of chat-based large language models, we have opened a new aspect where we are seeing millions of users using this to carry out their daily tasks, be it writing content, writing emails, coding, planning their tasks, solving for arithmetic problems, basic level of logical reasoning, basic level of product related tasks which they may be doing, etc. And what has that led to is you're seeing these LLMs which are able to provide near human experience for a specific amount of task, which has improved efficiency, productivity for businesses. But it's also helped people at large to be able to use technology for gathering information, for learning new ideas, for just being able to, solve for their private problems. I mean, I know people are using LLMs, ChatGPT for taking relationship advice, right? So what's really happening is that the LLMs have democratized or basically enhanced the use of direct user interface with artificial intelligence as it is. And so we are now exposed to these models firsthand. And that's why there is a lot of conversation on regulation, because these are very powerful models. They have been trained on billions of parameters. In fact, I think the newest LLMs have been trained on more than 1 trillion parameters, and it continues to grow. They have been trained on billions of data sets, and they can solve for a lot of issues. They can solve for a lot of tasks, which means that slowly and surely you will see a rejig with respect to how industry, hires people and resources people, and you will soon see a need for people to upskill themselves and to be able to use these models to do a better task and to perform tasks. Because if you don't know how to use these models, maybe you may not have a job. But what is also happening is it's increasing efficiency, productivity tremendously. So what you're seeing is a social churn with respect to the arrival of these models, which has augmented human ability to carry out a task. It has also enhanced our understanding of what is possible. So for example, you can code now. In fact, you can develop an AI application on your own. You don't need to be trained with coding for years. You can just learn it quickly, and the model does everything else for you. You need an idea. If you have a vision for an app, you take an open source LLM, train certain data sets specific to that task you need, and there you go. It can help you do a lot of things. So for example, in the legal industry, what we are seeing is that you just take a pre-trained LLM, train it with all the case laws. It will understand precedents. It already has a significant number of parameters to it because it's pre-trained, highly pre-trained. And then if you come across a case in the future, you just put the problem there in the LLM, it will give you an answer with respect to, okay, this case has a similar precedent to X case in 1995 and 1994, and the judgment said this is this. So for this case, the judgment should also be XYZ. So it can solve your problems tremendously. So the churn is that society is going to use it to amplify its ability to do its job better. So it will save us with a lot of time to do other tasks with respect to thinking or planning or strategizing. Of course, the LLMs are not as at that level. I don't know if they will ever reach that level of human strategic thinking, or because consciousness is an important part. Human intelligence relies on memory, and none of these models actually use memory to output data. What is necessary is to appreciate that these are significant moments in our history, and they are causing a lot of churn with respect to how people will use them in the future. Now, having said that, it comes with its own sets of harms, its own sets of challenges, and it is, the relationship of technology with existing tech regulation is being relooked at, and because there are new intersectionalities which we have to now consider. So the relationship of these models with competition laws, traditional competition harms needs to be looked at with respect to misinformation and how these models can be used to create content farms or disinformation campaign. These are some of the issues that needs to be looked at. We need to relook at the copyright laws globally when it comes to these models, because what we have been looking at, and I think what I believe is, this is a term which I've coined, is democratize before regulate, right? So what do we mean by democratize before regulate is that you are seeing the rise of LLMs, and I think LLMs will be the future of our interaction when it comes on the internet, with our abilities to perform our tasks, duties, etc., and to do many things. This is the internet of the future. But you need to ensure that you allow smaller startups, smaller businesses with lesser resources to be able to compete at that highest level when it comes to LLMs. And we are not there yet. If you regulate early enough, you will create a barrier of entry. So what you need to do in India specifically, I think we need to allow the growth of local LLMs to proliferate for the next 5 or 7 years, while at the same time creating guardrails and effective soft principles of soft regulation for all LLMs to ensure that they meet certain criteria of principles, right? They are transparent, they are accurate, they are they are not they are trained with minimal bias, etc. But at the same time, we need to also ensure that we have some exemptions for LLMs. So we need copyright exemptions. We also need data protection exemptions, both of them. Required for smaller LLMs, local made in India LLMs to grow. Because if you don't do that, what you'll end up creating is a massive barrier of entry. Because if you restrict the use of data today for the new LLMs, it will be very difficult to reach a very high level and to reach those trillions of parameters. So we need to start thinking about regulation. We need to start regulating in a soft approach. But I do not agree with a EU type AI Act for India for at least the next 5 years, maybe more or less, until we are convinced that we have sufficient participation from all different industry members when it comes to these large LLMs, and then let them compete, regulate, and then see how it grows.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for valuable insights.